Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again, and thank you very much for joining us today to learn a little bit more about centralizing your tax information reporting process. I am Lauren Skinner Johnson with Convey Compliance, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone will be on mute for the duration of the event so that we can facilitate efficiency and respect everyone's time. If you do have a question at any time during the presentation, please type it in either the chat or the Q&A box, again in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will do our very best to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the event. Also, Convey hosts an annual tax and regulatory conference called the C2 Summit. And this year, the C2 Summit will be held at the Omni Dallas Hotel in Dallas, Texas, starting on Sunday, September 23rd through Wednesday, September 25th, 2012. Convey's C2 Summit is a live tax information reporting seminar that includes about 2.5 days of regulatory compliance as well as Convey solution sessions. Now, before we get started, I'd like to get a better understanding of your current tax information reporting process with a couple of poll questions. The first poll should pop up on your screen is, how many 1099 systems do you currently have or currently use? I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that polling question. Great, thank you everyone. We do have one additional poll that we'd like to ask. The second poll is, what is your biggest concern with your current process? A, client experience, B, cost, C, compliance risk, D, I don't know, but I am a little bit concerned with my current process, or E, I'm not concerned at all. Again, I'll give you just a minute to respond. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Neil Lefevre, Product Manager for Convey. Neil's going to discuss how leveraging a centralized approach to tax information reporting can really help to ensure corporate compliance as well as eliminate penalties.
Great, thanks Lauren. So we're going to kind of cover 3 different areas in today's presentation, and if we have time, we will open it up to questions at the end. So the first kind of couple agenda items are, first of all, am I decentralized? Meaning what's a current process look like from a centralization standpoint? So where are you at today, and what do I mean by decentralized versus centralized? What are some common issues if you do have a decentralized information reporting process? And then kind of at the end talk through what do we mean by centralization, and what are the top 5 advantages to going to a more centralized, streamlined process. So first of all, what do I mean by decentralized? Well, in general, it means you have more than one system that's creating or filing 1099s within your organization. So based on the first polling question, it looked like the majority of folks in this webinar have 2 to 5 information reporting systems today within their organization, followed by more than 5 and 1. We're kind of tied, but it looks like most folks on here have at least 2 or more, in some cases more than 5 different systems within their organization creating 1099s. Beyond just systems producing 1099s, generally you also have multiple source systems making payments. And really there's no central repository where all the 1099 process is occurring. And a quick example of that would be in an insurance organization, for example. You might have an AP department who is making vendor payments, and they are using their AP tools to actually create 1099s for those vendors. And then another area within their organization is making claims payments. And maybe they've accumulated or acquired a few different organizations over time, and they haven't merged those claim systems. So they're actually producing 1099s from each claim system. In this case, maybe 3 different claim systems are all creating 1099s, and then their AP department is also creating 1099s. So when we say decentralized, that's kind of what we're talking about, is 1099s flowing from various parts of the organization. So what does that look like graphically? And I know there's kind of a lot to take in this image, but really this is kind of a good picture of what 1099 reporting looks like in many organizations. So in this case, an organization has 3 different tax reporting systems, X, Y, and Z, and they have 4 different divisions. So if you look, starting on the left, division C has a source system, which is sending information to information reporting system Y, and they're creating forms and doing filings. Then you have divisions A and B, which are using their own system and creating forms and doing filings. And finally, tax reporting system Z, which is producing forms from source system D. So you have kind of this chaotic process. Everyone's kind of siloed and doing their own thing, and this can really create a lot of problems and introduce a lot of risk as well as overhead within your organization. So at a high level, a few issues with a very decentralized process. First and foremost, beyond risk is cost. So in reference to the last diagram, in that case you have multiple people who are handling your 1099s, doing the printing. You have a lot of people essentially doing the same job within your organization. So there's a lot of duplication of resources in this type of decentralized setup. You also have the cost of multiple systems. So each 1099 system you're either purchasing or you're spending time and money internally updating your system with all the annual updates the IRS is making, and different tweaks and enhancements to those systems. In a lot of cases, if you're producing forms from various spots, you may be producing multiple forms for the same individual. So if you have an individual who's perhaps getting paid out of 2 different claim systems, in a decentralized world, you're creating 2 different 1099s that are going to that individual. So you have just not only the processing costs, but the print and mail costs can add up to tens of thousands, or in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, depending on how many forms you're actually processing. And then in general, usually when organizations are very decentralized, 1099 reporting is a very manual process, or at least aspects of it like B notices and corrections are very manual, and it's not very automated and streamlined. So there's a lot of overhead cost in just the manual processes and workarounds that people go through. So besides cost, risk is a huge issue, and based on the polling results, compliance risk was the #1 concern that everyone on this webinar had, which makes sense. If everything is decentralized, no one has a very good overall view of the process, and in a lot of cases there's not checks and balances that are occurring. So we talk to a lot of folks who come to us who have a decentralized process, and one of the reasons they decided to make a change was a group within their organization didn't file their 1099. So now they're getting audited, they're facing huge penalties, and in a lot of cases the person that did it last year wasn't there. They've moved on to another job, and no one knew they had to do 1099s. Without you know, everything flowing through one central channel, there's a good likelihood that something could get missed. So kind of dovetailing off that management oversight with a decentralized process, there's not really a good way to manage everything. So you're not ensured that forms are getting created properly and proper checks and balances are occurring. And then finally, customer service and experience. So not only are your customer service agents going to potentially be frustrated because they have to deal with multiple systems, your actual clients could have a bad experience. So if I'm getting 1099s from your organization and they're getting mailed out of different systems, I might get forms, different. They look different. The phone numbers for customer service are different. The overall look and feel, the timing of the forms is different. Maybe, I don't know if you're like me, but when I get my 1099s, I like to file my taxes and get them prepared right away. Well, if I think I have all my forms from you, I might go through that process on January 15th, and then February 3rd, I get, another form from another place within your organization. That's going to be a little bit frustrating to me as a recipient of those forms. So at a high level, those are a few general issues that we hear in dealing with clients who are currently in kind of a decentralized mode. So when we say centralization, what do we mean? At a high level, really it's multiple source systems, but only one 1099 system and process. So this is the same amount of source systems as the first diagram, but you can see they're all flowing into one central repository. And within that central repository, you're producing consolidated tax statements. You're putting these tax statements on your website, and you're sending these tax statements to the various state and federal agencies in a centralized, streamlined process. And we'll talk about kind of how to do that and what some of the advantages are of that. So just looking at the two diagrams, you can see kind of the first one is a little chaotic, everyone siloed and doing their own thing. In this, it's a much more controlled process, one set of procedures and controls that can be managed at a high level to ensure everything is done appropriately. So what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is just kind of talk through the kind of top 5 reasons why centralization makes sense for most organizations. And we'll take a deeper dive into these in the next few slides. So the first one, and this kind of correlates back to the polling results, is most people's concerns are making sure that they're compliant. And when everything is siloed and happening all over the place, that's very hard to do. So ensuring compliance is the #1 reason why centralization makes sense. #2, cost savings. So getting rid of all the duplicated resources and duplicated processes. #3, client experience. #4, management oversight, and that's of the overall process and resources that are involved. And then finally, customer service. So we'll dive into each of these one by one. So ensuring compliance. Most compliance issues that we see are people forgetting to file or not following the processes that are in place. So really having a consistent process through your entire organization with the appropriate checks and balances is the best thing that you can do to ensure that your forms are going to be compliant and that you're going to comply with the appropriate timelines and nothing is going to get missed or left behind. Repeatability. So why is repeatability here? Well, again, a lot of times folks get themselves out of compliance by not filing or filing things incorrectly. And if each area within your organization is doing their own process, if someone moves on to another position or there's any sort of change, you could run into issues. And year over year, if you're following one process, you can improve upon that process each and every year. You can measure that process, and you can make sure that you're getting better, you're making strides to being more compliant. And centralizing your process will also eliminate a bunch of manual steps in most cases, which is another way that organizations get themselves into trouble. There's one group that doesn't have as good of a process, and so they're doing things in spreadsheets, and spreadsheets get deleted or an older version gets overlaid, and that causes problems. So any manual step is a huge compliance risk. Your whole 1099 process should be automated through one central location. So #2 reason to centralize your information reporting, cost savings. I've touched on a few of these. The first one is data consolidation. So if you have multiple systems, you're paying for that data to be stored and processed and managed in different systems. Consolidating that data into one central place is just going to save on, hardware and software costs. It allows you to do things like federal limits. So for anyone who's not aware, the IRS will allow you to not send tax statements if the payments are below certain thresholds. And in a decentralized setup, you can't properly check your payments because the data is not consolidated, so you don't know if your aggregated totals are above those thresholds or below those thresholds. So if you consolidate your data, you're able to properly apply federal limits, and in some cases you might save 20–30% of your form volume by not sending out tax statements to individuals who are only getting paid, $5, $10, $30 depending on the form type. In a centralized world, you get to take advantage of scale. So you're going to get better prices on things like print, on the actual software and hardware that you're using to process 1099s. In general, the greater amount of forms that you're putting into your solution, the lower cost per unit that you're going to pay. Solution cost. So in a centralized world, you're paying for one 1099 solution and process. In a decentralized world, you're paying for multiple systems. So if they're smaller desktop solutions, they may not be that expensive. But if you have 2 or 3 internal systems or 2 or 3 enterprise solutions which are creating your 1099s, you might be saving tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars just on annual fees for those applications. Then annual maintenance fees. We all know and love the IRS, and they like to make changes on an annual basis, if not more frequently, sometimes multiple times per year for the same form type. So making those changes, if you're programming it internally, or even for your IT department, applying the updates, making the coding changes, there's a big cost to that, and there's a big opportunity cost because that's there's time spent on these updates that could be spent on other internal projects that are more core to your business than 1099 reporting. And then finally, resources. In a decentralized setup, you have multiple people doing the same thing. If you centralize everything, you can get one group who manages the process, and you get rid of all that duplication of resource. So number 3, client experience. So I touched on a few of these earlier, but as a recipient of tax documents from an organization, I want to get one single statement, and I want to get it, at the end of January. I don't want to get one statement in the middle of January and then one at the end of January. That's frustrating as a recipient of tax statements. Also, what we've seen is within the same organization, they're sending out tax statements which don't even look the same. So from a client experience, that's kind of weird to get a 1099 miscellaneous that looks, one way for one group and then it looks another way. I might be confused. Is this a, updated form? Is it, what's going on here? So that might generate a call to your customer service desk. And just getting a second form, individuals might think it's a correction or an updated statement. If you're centralizing your process and have the appropriate checks and balances, you're going to reduce, the chance of an error. So as a recipient of a form, I want to get that form, and I want the form to be right. If you don't have a centralized process and you have a bunch of manual things that are occurring, the greater chance of error, compliance error, address error increases. Again, that's going to create a bad or poor client experience. And from a centralization standpoint, if I call your organization and I have a question about a tax form, and I have 2 or 3 forms, I might not know, I might call one number and then I have another question about the other forms. Now you have to transfer me internally, to another group who can help me out. So it's just, it's not going to create a good overall end-to-end client experience. This is a big one as well, management oversight. So in a decentralized world, generally people are just responsible for their individual silo of information, and maybe there's someone who's responsible overall, but the visibility that they have in the process is very manual, and it's not very efficient. They might be getting multiple reports from different areas within their organization and trying to consolidate those. In a centralized world, you can easily run reports from your system to make sure that all the data is in the system, that everything balances. It also allows you to easily say, how many forms did we file last year? What was the total payment information that we filed, and compare it to what we've done this year? Is there a big delta? Did we do $10 million in 1099s last year and now we're doing 5? We might want to start questioning that. Not to say that you can't do that if you have multiple systems, but it just becomes a lot easier to do in a centralized world. And frankly, if it is centralized, just the chances of it happening are much greater than trying to run around and gather all this information. And then security, also a big one. So tax information reporting, you're dealing with people's social security numbers and their names. This is very, very confidential information, and having it floating around in different places within your organization is generally not a very good idea. So you want to get this information from your payment systems into one location where access to the information can be controlled, the appropriate audits and checks can be put into place so that we make sure that this data is being accessed only by individuals who should be seeing it. In a lot of cases, if it's siloed, access is generally a lot more open, and more people than probably should have access do have access to data, and it just creates a situation where you might not have compliance risk, but you're going to have a security risk. And more and more organizations are getting their names in the paper by leaking data, leaking confidential information. So getting everything into one secure central location that can be controlled and managed is imperative. And then finally, customer service. So you send out these 1099s, and inevitably there's going to be questions. Hopefully, if you've done your due diligence, you've checked and rechecked everything, the amount of questions that come back are going to be minimized. But there's a huge cost in customer service, especially if you have a lot of customer service agents. So someone calls up, they call your call center. In a centralized world, the individual service rep has access to all the different transactions and tax forms that were mailed out. In a decentralized world, they may only have access to a subset of the data, and then they need to transfer the individual somewhere else. So it creates a huge efficiency if you can get everything into a central location where your customer service agents can access the data and answer the questions that clients may have. From a training perspective, maybe you do give access to the various systems to your agents, but now you have to train this customer service agent on multiple systems. So in a centralized world, you're just training them on one solution. So the training time, especially for bringing in temps, for example, in February to handle calls, the training is going to be much more efficient and much faster. And then overall, from a customer service standpoint, really in a centralized world, we see a great reduction in calls, and first call resolution and other things are greatly reduced. So overall, the client service experience is just better if you're dealing with everything in one central repository. So just to kind of recap, in a centralized world, kind of some things to keep in mind and to work through are, really you're going to gain a compliance advantage. You're going to really reduce your risk of having penalties and late filings, and you're going to make sure that everything is filed. Cost savings from resource duplication, multiple systems updates. Your overall client experience is going to be better. It allows you management oversight, and then reduces the time it takes to train employees from a customer service standpoint. And for calls that do come in, they can be answered efficiently and effectively, again, improving on that overall client experience. So with that, if anyone's not very familiar with Convey, We are the industry leader in providing flexible, on-demand, centralized tax information reporting solutions. We've been doing this for over 25 years now, have just over 2,000 clients and nearly half of the Fortune 500 clients. As an organization, we are solely dedicated to tax information reporting, and this is really all we do is help organizations who have a current process which isn't very effective, which isn't very efficient, and which generally costs way too much, help them kind of bring all of their data into one of our applications to help them service their clients, and at the end of the day, hopefully save them some additional money. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Lauren.
Great. Thank you, Neil. We do have a couple of questions, and one of our most frequently asked questions is this webinar being recorded, and will I have access to the slides? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. I have recorded today's webinar, and we will be sending out an email probably early next week to all of the attendees with access to the recorded version of the webinar, as well as a PDF of the slides if you'd be interested in sharing them with any of your coworkers that couldn't attend today's event. And with that, I'm going to get started in some of the questions from the audience. First question, can I put multiple phone numbers on the same 1099 that represents different call centers or business units within my organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, when we're talking about reducing calls, a great way to do this is to create a 1099 form. And actually with our Convey solutions, what you can do is you can actually print transactions on the bottom of the form. So let's say you have two different source systems within your organization. You can actually consolidate that data, ship your recipient one 1099 form, and then on the bottom of that form you can actually break out source system 1, source system 2, and actually show how much of the overall 1099 payment came from each business unit. And next to each of those line items at the bottom of the form, you can print a different customer service number. So if someone has a question on one of the two business units, they actually can get a dynamic phone number which directs them right to that individual business unit.
Great. Thanks. Next question. Someone is asking, they've stated that they've already started preparing for tax season 2011. Is it too late to look into centralizing our process?
Well, it's definitely never too late to get started. With Convey Solutions, we do have a very fast and easy onboarding process. We can actually help you through that. Even this late in the year, we've actually usually bring a number of clients on board actually end of December or even beginning of January, believe it or not. So it's definitely not too late to start the process, and you know, the sooner the better.
A couple more questions. Hopefully everyone can hang on for just a couple more minutes. In your experience, Neil, does centralization actually reduce B notices?
Yeah, so overall, in a centralized world with the proper controls and checks, generally the data is going to be going to your recipients a lot cleaner and a lot more efficiently. So overall, your B notice count should go down. But for any B notices that you do have, what we find is, you know, you send data, let's say, from two systems. Well, guess what? If they're the same EIN, the IRS is going to send you back one B notice tape. So if you have everything centralized, it's very easy to process that B notice file and take the appropriate actions. But what we find in a decentralized world is it's very hard for organizations to get those B notices and just pick and choose which ones they need to handle versus which ones other business areas need to handle. So not only do you want to centralize the output of the 1099s, but once everything's in one repository, managing things like B notices are automatically centralized as part of that process. And dealing with B notices and making sure you're complying with all the appropriate rules becomes much, much easier.
Last question for today. Given my current process, how much time or how time consuming is it to centralize your current process?
So With any of Convey's solutions and offerings, we do have a very extensive onboarding process, as I mentioned before, and part of that onboarding process is actually doing all of the loading and setup for your source systems into one of our centralized solutions and working with you to do all of the setup and configuration. So the actual time and effort on your part is extremely minimal, and in a lot of cases getting IT's time on these projects can kind of create a bottleneck as they have a lot of other internal projects and other things going on, and since Convey is doing all the setup on our solutions, the actual IT involvement is extremely minimal. So it's definitely something that shouldn't be extremely burdensome on you, and it's definitely, going back to the first question, it's not too late to get started.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Now, before we end for today, I would like to let you know that if you are interested in any additional information on Convey solutions that can help streamline your current tax information reporting process, as well as help you stay in compliance, please visit us at convey.com or give us a call at 1-888-303-1099, or you can stay up to date on industry updates, some best practices, as well as IRS regulations by subscribing to our blog or following us on LinkedIn and/or Twitter. And with that, that concludes our webinar today. Thank you again for joining us.